Welcome back. Now, drug abuse remains one of the major concerns in townships and informal settlements. The problem has now affected communities that have been overwhelmed with an increasing number of addicts. Joining us is Themba Masango, who's a human rights activist from #NotInMyName, as well as Dr Tumi Mashego, who's a clinical psychologist, author and life coach. Thank you to you both for joining me this evening, and good evening to you. Themba, I'd like to start with you, just being an activist on the ground, to paint the picture. You know, a lot of the times it's said it gets worse before it gets better. But when it comes to drug abuse, it seems it's getting worse and worse and no better in sight. Is that a fair assessment?
I would actually reluctantly agree with you, because it seems as though when you take one step forward, then you find yourself taking another step back, especially in townships. This scourge of drugs, particularly Nyaube, has really affected the communities, especially young boys that are growing up. And, you know, once it affects these young boys, it also, goes on to affect their families. And when their families get affected, then the community gets affected. You will know that with our other organizations that we partner with, like Dlalisa Moyeni Foundation, we've got a program specifically for the boy children, where they are coming out of a heavy drug abuse. And the somebody uses the drugs, they have to go back home to steal appliances and things, and it becomes a cycle. They go to sell them somewhere. So it is really affecting society in a terrible way. And also understanding that South Africa, especially black families, almost 70 to 80% of them are fatherless. And when you have young men, and then obviously there's girls as well, but predominantly you have young men who are hooked on these drugs. And it's difficult to look at the future and say that we've got a winning future. But we believe that there are organizations out there, and I'm sure my colleague will be able to talk on that, we're able to make a turnaround with the scourge. But what I've found, that it needs to be the user himself or herself who decides that, I've had enough of this downward spiral in my life and I want to make a change. And, that's when true rehabilitation starts.
And speaking of that agency as well, that Themba's mentioning, Dr. Mashego, if you can take us through the psyche of an addict and what happens in that world, in their mind, and to get to that point of saying, I want to do this, because as the old saying goes, you can take the horse to the water, but you can't force the horse to drink the water.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. Sadly, in South Africa, we've got so many stresses at a personal, systemic, societal, environmental level, and we've got a divide between, the haves and the have-nots. So there's so much stressor and this generational inherent pain that we have going on. There's so much crime. I mean, we're talking about stats that are just, about violence that are just so high, unemployment. There's so many things that are happening around the South African human beings, or rather the youth, and also the adults in this society. We're dealing with so many things like your peer pressure, and, social media is also selling this lifestyle that does not exist. Right. So what happens is people then learn certain coping strategies from what they see in their communities, in their families, and also just from experimenting. And unfortunately, when they experiment, they're trying to escape their reality. But unfortunately, some people are predisposed to addiction than others. So me and you can experiment on a drug, and I get addicted and you do not. And I think what happens is with things like Nyaube, which is a cheaper form of drug that's available easily out there, what happens is it's a gateway drug. So they try it, and then for a bigger high, they then, it's mixed with other things. And I think that's where the danger is. It's not just now, but it's mixed with so many things. I mean, there are people who've got stories where they mixed it with crystal, with ARVs. It's a lot that is happening out there. So by the time the person, presents with severe addiction, where they're selling things to, feed their addiction, the problem has, is so far gone in. And, unfortunately, prognosis is always poor with drug addiction, in that the person must want their help, but also there's physiological and psychological, addiction, in that it's not just, somebody just going cold turkey and stopping. There's so many effects, and it impacts so many things. And it's quite a sad reality that we are dealing with in South Africa. And, there's also the human nature stigma of not wanting to sit with our problems. So I think that in itself complicates the need to get help, and people do not seek the help that they need before there's a crisis, because it's not easy. There's so much stigma around seeking psychological or mental health related help for anything. So there's just a complicated thing going on, which is quite sad, because we're seeing the reality of it manifest now in 2024.
Dr. Mashego, you're mentioning that certain people tend to be more prone to becoming addicted. So if somebody's watching this tonight and thinking, oh, let me just experiment, I don't think I'll get addicted. Are there telltale signs to be able to know, look, I have an addictive personality and I won't be able to just experiment with something that is actually bad for me?
Sadly, we don't know what we don't know. And the more you tell somebody, don't try it, you don't know how it will impact you, is the more that people want to try. So my view is that we need to view addiction the same way we view, someone will be healthy, a quote, on the outside, and yet they're predisposed to cancer, meaning they ideally from the outside don't have things that, put them at risk for cancer, but then they develop cancer. And it's the same with diabetes, cholesterol. On the outside, they might look like they're healthy. They might be doing things that seem like they, put them, that save them from developing these challenges, and yet they are predisposed to it. So we really need to understand that outside of the environmental factors, there's also the genetic factor. And unfortunately, you don't know until you are in it sometimes that you actually are more at risk. But of course, if we're taking the history from the professional point of view, you can see, from taking the history, that there has been signs that this person might struggle with this just based on how they deal with things, or maybe they're prone to anxiety, they're prone to depression, they're prone to self-medicating with things like, over-the-counter things, like your medication just for a headache, or even food. So there are telltales if, you look at the history of the person and how they dealt with stress, or how they attempted to deal with stress, in that they might have had maladaptive or coping strategies that are not helping them out, and yet they continued with them in spite of that. And I think the trick with that is that with addiction, there's also the brain chemistry involved, meaning the neurotransmitters, meaning some people might actually, be impacted in that they might need medication to help them curb the addiction. And unfortunately also, with addiction, so when you get the high, even though the minute you get the low, you want the bigger high. So there's also the brain chemistry part of it that's involved that can put one, at a poorer prognosis than someone else if they become addicted to any drug. And remember, drugs range from, as I said, even food addiction is considered an addiction because of the severity it can cause to one's life. And anything that impacts your psychological functioning, that's where we deem it a disorder or something that warrants help, and that is quite crucial in one's functioning.
Yeah, and I mean, Themba, you just heard Dr. Mashego there when speaking about Nyaupe, saying that the other danger of it and what makes it so lethal and addictive is that it's mixed with other things as well. Let's talk about these other things too, because we've also heard of this trend of cemeteries being targeted by so-called Nyaupe boys. Tell us a little bit more about that.
No, indeed. I mean, a whole concoction of things go into this. And it's also part of the reason why police find it difficult to actually even arrest on, because what are you actually arresting somebody on? Somebody has taken a battery, somebody has gone and broken, a grave, and gone and actually tried to take somebody and fluids from a human being. Somebody people try to get ARVs and mix them with this concoction. And as a doctor said, it's trying to chase the bigger high and get the higher high. And I fortunately or unfortunately have experience with this with family members of mine who were really addicted, and some broke off, and there were some who did not manage, unfortunately, to break it off. And it starts off as somebody saying, I can handle this. And as a doctor was saying, it starts off with small things, the cough mixture. Then tomorrow, it goes on to stronger stuff that they're smoking, and then it goes deeper and deeper. And it's a very painful thing for a family to experience somebody with great potential and zest for life, just really crumbling and breaking down because of this thing that they've fallen in love with. And when a person is addicted, it's very difficult to actually convince them otherwise. It's like somebody who believes in these fake prophets. You can't tell them otherwise, and they want to, one hide. Two, when they are high, they are at their best and they feel on top of the world. And then when you see them crashing down, and then it all comes back to the family, where now they are looking for money, and then eventually now they have to be stealing from home, from neighbors and so on, and it really becomes a painful thing to see. And I'm sure we've got stories throughout the country, and we are a stressed nation. We are a nation that is going through a lot. However, we need to be able to, accentuate the positive, and be able to tell young people, especially at the young age, because now it's happening even at primary school level, to say, guys, just say no. And, that drugs is not the way to go. And we really need to get our messaging out there, stronger and more bolder, and fight it like we're campaigning for our lives here, because literally we are, and specifically for the young people of our country, where this thing has got them. And unfortunately, it is hitting us the hardest. When I say us, I'm saying majority of African people, especially with these concoctions that we have out in the market. And I also want to say to communities, we know people who are selling these things. We need to be able to stand up and say, that's not going to happen in my community. And we need to be able to partner with law enforcement agencies and really, kick it out and make a full stand. And I know some communities have started that. Where I'm from, like in Mamelodi, we've got patrollers that are patrolling from evening and early hours, and going house to house and making sure that they're trying to lessen the numbers of these affected young people. But really, it's going to take all hands on board, from business, from government, from civil society, the everyday person, and to also say to those who are addicted, you can break the cycle. Don't hide it. There's nothing cool about it. We can actually come out of this and live clean, healthy lives.
There's nothing cool about it, indeed. We could talk about this forever, indeed, because it is such a massive problem. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this evening. Thank you to both of you for spending time and sharing your insights with us on this very crucial topic.